welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, our final episode, if I'm not mistaken,
Of Creepypastas for now, yes.
yeah, the Creepypasta series, we have one of the probably most well-known ones,
It's definitely well known.
the Russian sleep experiment. So, sometime in the late 1940s, Russian researchers began an experiment to test the effectiveness of an experimental gas-based stimulant. They planned to do this by using the stimulant to keep the test subjects awake for 30 days. A sealed environment was created so that the gas and oxygen levels could be closely monitored, as high concentrations of the gas were known to be fairly toxic. The only way the room could be monitored was via speakers and microphones that had been placed within the room and via a porthole-sized window that was placed within the room's door.
Right.
The glass covering the window was 5 inches thick to help ensure no gas escaped.
Right.
So, the room was stocked with books, cots, a few toilets and sinks, and enough dried food to last the group for well over a month. The subjects were political prisoners that had been deemed enemies of the state during World War II. So, during the first 5 days of the experiment, everything went well. The subjects made a few complaints, possibly due to the fact that they had been promised their freedom at the end of the study, and that is if they were able to remain awake for the full 30 days.
Right.
The subjects' conversations and activities were monitored. It was noted that around the fourth day the subjects began to increasingly talk about traumatic experiences from their past. After 5 days, they began to complain about the events and circumstances that led to them getting captured and then forced into the experiment. They began to then exhibit severe paranoia, not trusting anything or anyone in their environment. They then stopped speaking to one another, but instead began to whisper at the various microphones around the room or at the window in the room's door. They seemed to believe that they could earn the trust of the researchers by giving them information on the other test subjects. This was at first considered to be a side effect of the gas. However, after 9 days, the first test subject started screaming. He ran the length of the room, screaming at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He only stopped once his vocal cords had become too damaged to continue.
Goodness.
He still continued trying to scream, but only ended up making hoarse squeaks. The strangest thing about his screaming fit was that the other subjects failed to react in any way to the man's apparent distress. While he screamed, they continued on as if nothing happened. Then, the second test subject began to scream. He then began to tear the books in the other room apart, page by page, and then smearing the pages with his own feces, and used them to cover the window to the room's door.
Ugh. Alrighty then. So now they can't see in, basically.
Yep. Now
they can hear them, but they can't see them.
Yep. As soon as the window was covered, the screaming then stopped, and then the subjects that had continued whispering into the microphones through the men's screaming bouts had also stopped.
So now it's quiet.
Now it's completely quiet, and they can't see into the room, so they have no idea what's going on.
Right.
3 days went by with the researchers checking the microphones every hour to make sure that they were still functioning. They also monitored the oxygen consumption in the room, and everything pointed to all 5 men still being alive. In fact, the oxygen being used was equivalent to what 5 people would consume at a very high level of strenuous exercise.
Okay.
On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers decided to do something that they had initially not planned to. They decided to use the intercom in the room to try to speak to the men. They had hoped that they would be able to provoke some sort of response from the subjects, something that would indicate that the men were still alive and that they had not become catatonic.
Right.
The researchers made an announcement into the room. "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." The researchers received a response to their announcement. However, it was one that had left them completely shocked. One of the subjects replied in a calm voice, "We no longer want to be freed."
Oh, that's creepy.
Absolutely. The researchers then began to debate their next steps with the military forces that were funding their study. They decided to try the intercom for a bit longer, hoping to get more responses, but after a few hours, they abandoned that plan and decided it was time to open the door and see what lay inside.
Oh, God.
At midnight on the 15th day, the chamber was flushed of the gas stimulant and the chamber was filled with fresh air. As soon as the gas began to be filtered out of the chamber, the subjects inside began to object. Then, as the fresh air was dumped in, they could hear the voices of 3 different test subjects, and they were pleading for them to stop. Pleading as if they were begging for the life of a loved one for the gas to be turned back on.
Oh, my God.
Their pleas were ignored, and the chamber door was opened. The subjects began to scream and wail. Their screams were soon followed by those of the soldiers that had been sent into the chamber to check on the subjects. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, though this term is used very loosely, as even though they were alive in that they were still breathing and their hearts were beating, the food rations that had been provided had not been touched since day 5.
Good grief. 10 days.
And hearing that, you can probably guess what happened to the 5th subject. The 5th subject was, dead. Let's say. He was found with chunks of meat from their thighs and chest missing. The chunks had been stuffed into the drain that sat into the center of the chamber's floor, and the floor was flooded with water and among other bodily fluids.
Ugh.
The 4 remaining subjects also had their abdominal organs removed and were fanned out over the floor.
Oh, God.
The heart, lungs, and diaphragm of each subject remained intact, and they also had several areas of self-inflicted wounds, in which skin and muscle had been ripped from their bodies. It was later found that the men had eaten these parts of their bodies.
Oh, gosh.
The men alternated between screaming and begging for the gas to be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. When the soldiers began trying to remove the men from the chamber, they put up a surprisingly hard fight. One of the soldiers was killed when one of the men ripped his throat out, while another was severely injured with his testicles being brutally wrenched from his body.
Oh, God. That's brutal.
That is brutal. Another 5 soldiers lost their lives after choosing to end their own lives in the weeks after entering the chamber.
Ugh.
One of the test subjects had their spleen ruptured and they began to bleed profusely. They attempted to sedate the man, injecting him with 10 times the normal dose of morphine for a man of his size. However, it had no effect and he began to fight like a cornered animal.
Good grief.
He managed to break the ribs and arms of one of the doctors that was attempting to help him. He bled out to the point that there was almost no blood at all left in his body. Yet his heart continued to beat for a full 2 minutes after. During this time, he continued to scream and flail after his heart had finally stopped beating. The man continued to struggle for another 3 minutes while repeating the word "more" over and over again. He continued this until his voice became weaker and weaker and he fell silent and died.
Jesus.
The remaining 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The men continued to beg for the gas, demanding they be kept awake. When the first subject was taken into the operating room so that their organs could be placed back in their bodies, it was found that he was unable to be sedated. When the gas was brought out to put him to sleep, he began to violently fight against his restraints. He managed to almost completely tear through a 4-inch wide leather strap. A 4-inch wide leather strap
Goodness
that
gracious.
held one of his wrists. The gas increased slightly, and the man's eyes had eventually fluttered close. He immediately flatlined and passed away the
Jesus.
moment he fell asleep.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I kind of got to wonder how that happens.
I don't know.
I don't know exactly how your body would be affected by not
I'm guessing
staying.
shock or something.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Still confusing,
Yeah,
though.
it is.
Anyways, in the autopsy that was later performed, the man's blood was found to have 3 times the normal amount of oxygen in their blood. It was also found that during his struggle, he managed to break 9 bones.
Jesus.
The second test subject that was brought into the operating room was one of the subjects that had destroyed his vocal cords. Since he could not speak, he could only shake his head violently when he saw the gas that would be used to put him under. After seeing his reaction, the doctors reluctantly asked the man if he would like to have the surgery without anesthesia, to which the man nodded yes. They began the surgery and were astonished to find that the man lay perfectly still and gave no reaction at all for the full 6 hours of the surgery. The surgeon that placed the man's organs back in his body also tried to piece together the various wounds and announced that the man should not have been able to survive any of his injuries.
Goodness.
One of the nurses that attended the surgeon during the surgery reported that whenever she walked by, the man, while laying perfectly still for the entirety of his operation, would occasionally, their eyes would meet.
Right.
And he would give this really creepy smile.
That's so freaky. That is just so creepy.
Especially knowing that he's fully conscious during all of this.
It's just, ugh. It is kind of cringy.
So, when the surgeon had finished the surgery, the man began to wheeze and behave as if he was trying to communicate. Since the man could not speak, he was given a pen and paper. He wrote one simple request: keep cutting.
Oh, God.
His request was denied, and the other two test subjects were given the same choice to have the surgery without being put to sleep. They also agreed. However, the surgeon found it impossible to complete the surgery on either, as they would randomly break into fits of laughter. The subjects were then given paralytics, which only allowed them to follow the surgeon and nurses with their eyes. As soon as the paralytic began to leave their systems, they began to try to escape from their bindings, and again were asking to be given the stimulant gas. The researchers attempted to interrogate them, and they attempted to get some sort of reasoning for the subject's violent and unexpected behavior. However, no matter what they asked, they would only reply with one response: I must remain awake. The subjects were placed in stronger restraints, and they were put back in the chamber. This was done as a way to contain them and prevent further harm. So the researchers were afraid of the repercussions due to the overall failure of the experiment. In preparation for leaving the subjects in the chamber for an undetermined amount of time, the test subjects' restraints were given added padding, and they were attached to an EEG monitor. The subjects fought and struggled up until someone let it slip that they were going to be put back on the gas. It was becoming increasingly obvious that they were now struggling to try to stay awake. One of the subjects that still had their voice was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his limbs against the restraints, just as if trying to have something to focus on. The last remaining subject was holding his head from his pillow and blinking his eyes rapidly. Something strange was found when the brainwave activity was checked. The activity at first appeared as normal, but would then flatline randomly as if the patient would become briefly brain dead.
That's creepy.
The test subject that was holding his head above his pillow finally allowed his head to drop. Only one nurse was watching his face when this happened. As soon as his head hit the pillow, his eyes drifted shut and his brain waves immediately changed to those of someone that was in a deep sleep. His heart then flatlined again for the last time.
Goodness.
The last subject that was able to speak began to wail, demanding to be sealed in the chamber. The commander then gave the command to seal the chamber with himself, the two test subjects inside, and 3 researchers. Before the room could be cleared and sealed, one of the researchers immediately grabbed the gun from the commander's holster, shot the commander in the head, and then turned the gun on the mute test subject, shooting him as well. The remaining staff and researchers ran screaming from the room as the researcher pointed the gun at the last subject and screamed, "What are you? I must know." The test subject smiled and replied, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused for a moment, then aimed the gun at the subject's head, fired, killed the man. The man weakly choked out a single phrase as he died: "So nearly free." And that's it.
Jesus. That is a off the wall one. The
Chaos.
sad thing is that some of it could even be true. Is what's even worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good grief. That's nuts.
That's why I wanted to cover this during this series. Because this is absolutely something that someone could believe being true.
It could.
100%.
Yeah, because we read some horrible human experiments. So.
Especially around the World War II era.
Exactly.
Both during and after.
Very much so. So, yeah. Ugh. It's a good one, though. It's an old one, but it is creepy as... And it's out there.
Yeah. But, as I said, that's it. That's going to be our last episode for this series. Let us know in the comments if there are anything particular you want us to cover. It could be another creepypasta. It could be something we missed in a previous series we did.
True. Yeah, we're looking. We're going to be starting a new series up here on our next episodes. Haven't 100% decided what it's going to be yet, but we'll definitely be letting you know. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and don't forget to
Stay disturbed.